Darius had been prowling the boundaries of the cursed forest when he felt the surge. A millennium of bearing his bloodline's curse had taught him to sense the difference between deaths. Resignation, terror, peaceful surrender. This was none of those. This was something raw and wounded, a life force flickering with stubborn refusal even as it bled out into the rain-soaked earth. It came from the western edge, from the ritual grounds where the superstitious packs still offered their sacrifices, technically beyond his claimed territory, but the cursed forest answered to no borders but his own. He stopped, rain hammering against his bare chest, violet eyes igniting with electric fury as thunder rolled across the sky. Through the sheets of rain he could see them retreating, torches bobbing away through the trees, a procession of cowards fleeing the scene of their crime, and at the center of the abandoned circle, a broken figure crumpled in the mud. This was not his problem. The outer packs made their own barbaric choices, conducted their own pathetic rituals. But something about that fading pulse, about the sheer wrongness of it, made him move. He reached the clearing in heartbeats, his ancient power carrying him over ground that would have taken mortal wolves hours to cross. He expected another dried-up crone. He expected a criminal. What he did not expect was for his curse to quiet for the first time in 3 centuries. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button and let me know which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now back to the story. From the edge of the ritual circle, Darius stood perfectly still as rain washed over the scene before him. A young woman lay half-submerged in mud, her torn dress clinging to wounds that should have already killed her. Her breathing was shallow, her skin deathly pale, but her eyes, even half-closed, burned with something that made his chest constrict. The priestess's prayer poles still smoked in the downpour, and he could read the inscriptions carved into the earth. Offering to end the famine. May the forest consume what the pack cannot keep. But Darius saw the truth immediately. This was no offering. This was a disposal dressed in ceremony. The ritual was incomplete, rushed, designed not to honor but to hide. And when his gaze landed on the single set of boot prints that led to her side before retreating, then on the smaller, deliberate footprints of someone who'd watched without intervening, he understood. Betrayal, calculated and complete. Marceline's lips moved, barely a whisper, blood staining her mouth. Raven! The cold came first. Not the sharp bite of winter wind, but the deep, bone-seeping cold that meant the body had already begun surrendering. Marceline's fingers scraped uselessly at the mud, her torn dress plastered to skin that had gone numb hours ago. Or was it minutes? Time had become as meaningless as the prayers Oriana had chanted while Raven tied the ceremonial rope around her wrists. For the good of the pack. For the end of the famine. For the forest's mercy. Mercy. The word tasted like copper in her mouth, mixing with the blood from where she'd bitten her tongue to keep from screaming. She'd given them that much dignity at least, she hadn't begged. Even when Raven's hands, the same hands that had once cradled her face and promised forever, had shoved her into the mud at the center of the ritual circle. Even when his eyes had slid away from hers, unable to hold her gaze as Oriana declared her fate. The rain came harder now, each drop a tiny violence against her exposed skin. Lightning fractured the sky, illuminating the prayer poles driven into the earth around her, their carved warnings still smoking despite the downpour. Do not follow. Do not retrieve. The forest claims what is given. Marceline's laugh came out as a wet, broken sound. Given. As if she'd been a gift instead of garbage. As if the pack elders hadn't spent 3 days debating whether an Omega's life was worth trading for a promise of full harvests. As if Raven hadn't stood before the council and called her expendable. She tried to push herself up, but her arms buckled. The wound at her side, courtesy of Oriana's purification blade, had soaked through the thin fabric, and the mud beneath her had turned dark with it. They'd made sure she couldn't run. Made sure she couldn't fight. Made sure that even if she survived the night, the forest would finish what they'd started. The trees groaned in the wind, their branches scraping together like accusations. The cursed forest. 10 years of famine. And the superstitious fools of her pack had decided the old ways were the answer. Blood for bounty. Death for deliverance. And Marceline, the orphaned Omega with no family to protest and no mate to protect her, because Raven had rejected their bond the moment the council suggested her name, had been the perfect sacrifice. Another flash of lightning. In its brief, terrible light, Marceline saw the forest properly for the first time. Not the friendly woods where she'd gathered herbs as a child, but something else entirely. The trees were wrong here, twisted and blackened, their trunks bearing scars that looked almost intentional, almost like words. The undergrowth rustled despite the rain, and she heard sounds that made her remaining strength curl inward. Breathing. A step. Things that moved on more than 4 legs. Fear should have come. Instead, she felt only a dull, distant anger. Let the forest have her. Let whatever lived in these cursed shadows tear her apart. At least it would be honest. At least the monsters here didn't pretend to love her first. Her vision blurred, rain or tears or blood loss stealing the edges of the world. The cold was deeper now, spreading from her core outward, and she recognized it for what it was. Dying felt quieter than she'd imagined. Lonelier. Then the air changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in pressure that made her ears pop. The rain still fell, the wind still howled, but something had entered the clearing. Something that made the rustling in the undergrowth stop. Something that made the twisted trees seem to lean away. Marceline's breath caught. Every instinct she still possessed screamed danger, but her body was too broken to obey. She couldn't run. Could barely lift her head. All she could do was lie there in the mud and feel the weight of a presence so vast, so utterly predatory, that her dying pulse kicked back to life in pure animal panic. The sensation of being watched crawled across her skin like ice. Not the casual observation of the forest's smaller creatures, but something focused, intelligent, hungry. She forced her eyes open, blinking against the rain. The clearing was empty. The prayer poles stood sentinel. The trees swayed. But she knew with a certainty that bypassed logic, that she was not alone. Who's there? Her voice came out as barely a whisper, stolen by the storm. She tried again. Show yourself. Nothing. Only the rain and the wind and that terrible, terrible weight of attention. Lightning split the sky again, closer this time, and in the half-second of illumination, Marceline saw them. Not reflected light or imagination, but actual eyes burning in the darkness between the trees. Violet. Electric. Inhuman. They were too high off the ground to belong to a wolf. Too steady to belong to any creature she'd ever encountered. They didn't blink. Didn't waver. They simply watched her with an intensity that made her chest constrict, made her wonder if dying from her wounds might be the merciful option after all. The darkness swallowed them again as the lightning faded, but Marceline knew they were still there, still watching. The air crackled with something that had nothing to do with the storm, a power that made her skin prickle and her remaining strength evaporate. She should have been terrified. She was terrified. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. A strange, hysterical relief. Whatever owned those eyes would end this. Would finish what her pack had started. At least it wouldn't be slow. At least it wouldn't be lonely. Do it, she whispered to the darkness. To those violet eyes she could no longer see but could still feel. Whatever you are. Just do it. The rain answered with another surge of cold. Her fingers had gone completely numb now, her breathing shallow and irregular. The wound at her side pulsed in rhythm with her failing heart. She could feel consciousness slipping, the world narrowing to a pinpoint of sensation. But even as the edges went dark, even as her body surrendered to the cold and the blood loss and the absolute betrayal that had brought her here, those eyes remained, watching, waiting, burning through the storm like twin stars, beautiful and terrible and impossibly, devastatingly real. Marceline's last coherent thought, before the darkness took her completely, was that they weren't the eyes of a monster. They were worse than that. They were the eyes of something that chose to be monstrous. something that had been watching her suffer and had decided, for reasons she would never understand, to let her fall just far enough to break. Then the violet light flared brighter, and Marceline knew nothing at all. The storm raged on. The rain continued to fall. The cursed forest held its breath. And in the darkness between the trees, Darius stepped forward to claim what the fools had so carelessly thrown away. Warmth was wrong. Marceline's first conscious thought came wrapped in that simple, undeniable fact. She'd been dying in the cold, in the mud, in the rain that had tried to wash away her last moments. Warmth meant she was dead. Warmth meant the forest had taken her somewhere else, somewhere that made no sense in any theology she'd ever been taught. But dead people didn't hurt like this. The pain arrived in waves, her side where Oriana's blade had carved its purification, her wrists where the ceremonial rope had bitten deep, her ribs where someone's boot had landed during the struggle she barely remembered. Everything ached with the specific intensity of a body that had been brutally used, and was now demanding answers about why it was still functioning. She forced her eyes open. Stone ceiling. Rough-hewn beams. Firelight dancing across walls that looked like they'd been carved from a mountain itself. Not the afterlife, then. Or if it was, the architects had made some interesting choices. Marceline tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Her body screamed protest, her side erupted in fresh agony, and her vision swam with black spots that threatened to pull her back under. She collapsed against pillows that were far too soft to belong in any place she deserved to be. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The voice came from the shadows near the door. Low, female, and carrying the kind of authority that suggested disobedience would be met with consequences. Marceline's head snapped toward the sound, ignoring the way the movement made her skull throb. A woman stepped into the firelight. Tall, silver-haired, wearing leather armor that had seen actual combat. Her eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, and they assessed Marceline with the clinical detachment of someone evaluating livestock. "You've been unconscious for 2 days," the woman continued, moving closer with steps that made no sound on the stone floor. "The healers weren't sure you'd wake at all. You lost enough blood to kill 3 full-grown wolves." "Where?" Marceline's voice cracked, her throat raw. "Where am I?" "Thornhaven Fortress. The king's personal stronghold." The woman picked up a clay cup from a nearby table and held it out. "Drink. You need the strength." Marceline stared at the cup like it might contain poison. Probably did. Nothing about waking up in warmth and softness made sense when she should have been dead in the cursed forest. "The king. King Darius." The woman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those ice-blue eyes. "Ruler of the cursed lands. Master of the territories your pack likes to pretend don't exist. The man who carried your bleeding body out of that forest and hasn't left this wing of the fortress since." The words landed like physical blows. The violet eyes. The predatory presence. The sensation of being watched while she'd lain dying. It hadn't been her imagination or some final hallucination before death. It had been him. "Why?" The question came out barely louder than a breath. The woman's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "That's what everyone's been asking. The king doesn't involve himself in the petty politics of the outer packs. He certainly doesn't rescue dying omegas from ritual sacrifices." She set the cup down on the table beside the bed with a decisive clink. "Drink it or don't. But if you want answers, you'll need to be strong enough to stand when he comes." "When he comes?" Marceline's pulse spiked, pain and panic tangling together. "He's been waiting for you to wake. He's not a patient man, but he's been." The woman paused, choosing her words carefully. "Controlled. For him anyway. When you're ready, there's clothing in the chest by the window. Clean yourself if you can. The king values many things, but weakness isn't one of them." She left before Marceline could form another question, the heavy door closing with a finality that echoed through the stone chamber. Alone again, Marceline let herself sink back into the pillows and tried to make sense of what little she knew. King Darius. The name itself was legend, whispered in the kind of stories mothers told to keep children from wandering too far into the deep woods. The Ruthless King. The man who'd supposedly torn apart an entire rebellion with his bare hands. The Alpha whose power was so vast, so terrifying, that even the Council of Ravens refused to challenge his territories. He'd been there. In the forest. Watching. The realization made her stomach twist. How long had he watched? Had he seen Raven tie her wrists? Had he heard Oriana's false prayers? Had he witnessed her crawling in the mud, bleeding and abandoned, and simply waited? Marceline forced herself upright this time, teeth gritted against the pain. Her dress was gone, replaced by a soft linen shift that fell to mid-thigh. Someone had cleaned her wounds, bandaged them with practiced efficiency. Someone had cared for her body with the kind of attention that made her skin crawl with questions she didn't want answered. She stood on shaking legs, using the bed frame for support. The room was large, far too large for a prisoner, which meant she was something else. Hostage. Property. The silver-haired woman's words echoed back. The king values many things, but weakness isn't one of them. The chest by the window held a simple dark dress, sturdy boots, and a cloak lined with fur that probably cost more than Marceline's entire pack made in a season. She dressed slowly, her body protesting every movement, and caught sight of herself in the polished metal mirror mounted on the wall. She looked like exactly what she was, a broken thing that had been pieced back together. Her skin was too pale, her eyes hollow, the bruises on her throat still visible above the dress's neckline. But she was alive. Impossibly, inexplicably alive. The door opened without warning. He filled the doorway completely, and Marceline understood immediately why they called him ruthless. He wasn't just large, though he was easily the most massive man she'd ever seen, but there was something about the way he carried himself that suggested violence was always an option, always close to the surface. His silver hair fell past his shoulders, still damp as if he'd come straight from the rain. His bare chest carried scars that told stories she didn't want to read. And his eyes, those violet eyes that had watched her dying, that had burned through the darkness like twin stars. They fixed on her now with an intensity that made every instinct scream to look away, to submit, to make herself smaller. Marceline forced herself to hold his gaze. Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe or approval, before his expression settled back into stone. "You're awake." His voice was exactly what she'd expected. Commanding. The kind of voice that didn't ask questions because it didn't need to. "You watched." Marceline was surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "In the forest. You were there the whole time." He stepped into the room and she fought the urge to retreat. He moved like violence personified, all controlled power and predatory grace. "I was. Why didn't you stop them? Why would I?" He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, far enough that she couldn't mistake the distance for anything but deliberate. "Your pack was conducting a legal ritual on their own territory. I had no authority to intervene." The words hit like a slap. "So you just watched. You watched them abandon me to die. I watched them commit a crime." His expression didn't change, but something in his tone shifted. Sharpened. Abandonment. Attempted murder dressed in ceremony. The moment they left you there, bleeding and bound, they violated the ancient laws. The moment they walked away, you became unclaimed property. And unclaimed property in the cursed forest belongs to me. The room tilted. Marceline grabbed the bedpost to keep from swaying. "You let them finish. You let them think they'd killed me so you could claim me legally." "Yes." No apology. No justification. Just that single devastating word. "You're a monster." The words came out as a whisper, but they carried all the venom she possessed. Darius's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile on a kinderman. On him it looked like a warning. "I'm the king. Monsters serve me." He moved closer, and this time Marceline did step back, her spine hitting the wall. He didn't follow, just stood there like a storm given human form. Your pack threw you away. They carved their prayers into the earth and left you to bleed out in the rain. They believed the forest would consume you, that their sacrifice would end their famine. They were half right. What do you want from me? Want? The word seemed to amuse him. You're here because you're mine now. Legal salvage. Found property. The laws are very clear about what happens to abandoned wolves in my territory. His eyes swept over her, clinical and assessing. You'll heal. You'll serve. And you'll never see the pack that discarded you again. I'm not property. No. Something in his expression shifted, became almost dangerous. You're much more interesting than that. He turned toward the door then paused. The woman who tended you is Vera, my captain of the guard. She'll explain the rules of this place. Follow them, and you'll find Thornhaven far more hospitable than the pack that tried to kill you. Break them. He glanced back, those violet eyes burning in the firelight. And you'll discover why they call me ruthless. He left, the door closing behind him with a sound like a cell door locking. Marceline slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold stone floor, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. She'd survived the betrayal, survived the forest, survived bleeding out in the rain. But looking at that closed door, feeling the phantom weight of those violet eyes still on her skin, she wondered if survival was going to be its own kind of curse. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. The storm that had never really left was building again. And somewhere in this fortress carved from darkness and ancient stone, the king who'd let her almost die so he could legally own her was watching. Always watching. Marceline pulled her knees to her chest and let herself finally, truly understand what Raven and Oriana had done. They hadn't just tried to kill her. They'd delivered her to something far worse than death. They'd handed her to a man who'd calculated her suffering, who'd waited for the perfect legal moment, who'd claimed her with all the emotion of someone collecting discarded goods. And the worst part, the part that made her stomach twist and her chest tighten with something she refused to name, was that her body had already started to recognize him. Her wolf, silent and traumatized since the betrayal, had stirred the moment he'd entered the room. Not in fear. In recognition. In something that felt horribly, impossibly like coming home. She was alive. She was claimed. She was trapped. And the king with violet eyes was waiting to see what she would do about it. The screaming started 3 nights after Marceline woke. Not human screaming, though that would have been terrible enough, but the kind of sound metal makes when it's being torn apart. The kind of sound stone makes when it cracks under impossible pressure. The kind of sound that made every wolf in Thornhaven Fortress press themselves to the floor and bare their throats to empty air. Marceline bolted upright in bed, her healing wounds protesting the sudden movement. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate, and through the narrow window she could see violet lightning splitting the sky in patterns that had nothing to do with any natural storm. The bolts moved like living things, like serpents hunting prey, and they all originated from the same point, the king's tower. She should have stayed in her room. Should have followed Vera's explicit instructions about remaining in the guest wing after dark. Should have remembered that she was property here, salvage, and that investigating the master's business was a quick way to discover exactly how ruthless he could be. But the sound came again, that terrible shriek of power meeting stone, and Marceline found herself moving before conscious thought could stop her. She pulled on the cloak, ignored the way her side throbbed with each step, and slipped into the corridor. The fortress was empty. Every guard, every servant, every living soul had apparently decided that whatever was happening in the king's tower was none of their concern. Their survival instinct was better than hers. Marceline pressed forward anyway, drawn by something she couldn't name, something that pulled at her chest like a hook embedded behind her ribs. The tower stairs seemed to stretch forever, winding up through stone that grew warmer with each step. By the time she reached the heavy iron door at the top, her skin was slick with sweat and the air tasted like ozone. Another crack of violet lightning illuminated the gap beneath the door, and she heard something that made her blood freeze. Raw, animal pain, vocalized in a voice she recognized. Marceline pushed the door open. The room beyond was chaos given form. Furniture lay scattered and broken, torn apart by forces that had nothing to do with physical strength. Scorch marks decorated the walls in violent patterns, some still smoking. The windows had shattered outward, and rain poured through the openings, mixing with the violet energy that crackled through the air like living electricity. And at the center of it all, on his knees with his head thrown back and his hands clawed into the stone floor hard enough to leave grooves, was Darius. Lightning poured from him. Not metaphorically. Actual bolts of violet electricity that arced from his body to every surface, that danced across his skin like burning veins, that lit his eyes from within until they were nothing but blazing purple light. His entire body shook with the effort of containing it, muscles straining, teeth bared in a grimace that was half agony and half rage. "Get out!" The words came through gritted teeth, barely human. Now! Marceline should have listened. Should have fled back down those stairs and buried herself under her blankets and pretended she'd never seen this. But she'd seen suffering before. Had worn it like a second skin while her pack debated her worth. And whatever else Darius was, Monster King, the man who'd let her almost die for legal convenience, he was suffering now. She stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind her. "Are you insane?" Another bolt of lightning tore through the air, missing her by inches and leaving a blackened crater in the wall. "I can't control it. I'll kill you." "You won't." She didn't know where the certainty came from, but it was absolute. The same pull that had drawn her up the stairs now urged her forward, toward the epicenter of the storm. Marceline. Her name on his lips was a warning and a plea. "Leave." Instead, she crossed the distance between them, stepping over debris and through puddles of rainwater that sparked with residual energy. Close, the power was overwhelming. It pressed against her skin like physical weight, made her hair stand on end, filled her lungs with the taste of thunderstorms. But beneath it, beneath the violent overflow of energy, she could feel something else. Desperation. Exhaustion. A curse that had been burning for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to exist without it. Marceline dropped to her knees in front of him. His eyes snapped to hers, wide with something that looked like fear. "Don't." She reached out and placed her palm against his chest. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The lightning that had been pouring from him reversed, slamming back into his body with enough force to make him gasp. The violet light that had been consuming the room condensed, compressed, drawn like water down a drain toward the point where her skin met his. For a single terrible moment, Marceline felt it all. Centuries of accumulated power, a bloodline curse that had been building for generations, rage and grief and loneliness twisted together into something that wanted nothing more than to destroy. Then it stilled. The room fell silent except for the rain and their ragged breathing. The lightning that had been tearing everything apart now flickered beneath Darius's skin like embers, visible but contained. His eyes, still glowing faintly violet, fixed on her with an expression she couldn't read. "How?" His voice was raw, destroyed by screaming. "That's not possible." Marceline's hand was still pressed to his chest, and she could feel his heart hammering beneath her palm. Her own pulse raced to match it, and that strange pull in her chest had become a full-body awareness of exactly how close they were. How his skin burned hot beneath her touch. How every breath he took moved them fractionally closer together. "What's happening to you?" she whispered. "A curse." He hadn't moved, hadn't pulled away from her touch even though the lightning had subsided. 3 centuries old. My bloodline's gift and punishment. The power builds until it overflows, until I either release it or it tears me apart from the inside. His jaw clenched. It's been getting worse. The intervals between episodes shorter. The damage more severe. Eventually it will kill me. Or I'll lose control entirely and kill everyone in a 100-mile radius. But she looked down at her hand, still pressed to scarred muscle and overheated skin. "I stopped it. You grounded it." Something flickered in his expression, too complex to name. Drew it in like lightning to a rod. That shouldn't be possible. No one's touch has ever done anything but make it worse. You've tried this before. His silence was answer enough. She could imagine it. Desperate attempts to find relief, people who'd touched him and been burned or worse. People who'd tried to help and only fed the curse more power. Take your hand away, he said, and it sounded like an order and a plea all at once. What if I don't want to? Marceline. Her name again but different this time. Trained. You don't understand what you're offering. Then explain it to me. The moment you remove your touch, the buildup starts again. Faster now, because the curse recognizes relief and craves more of it. If you ground me once, my body will become dependent on it. On you. I'll need your proximity, your touch, your presence just to function without tearing myself and everything around me apart. His eyes burned into hers. You'll be my leash, my anchor, and I'll be your addiction. The words should have sent her running. Should have made her rip her hand away and flee back to her room and never look at him again. But Marceline thought about the last 3 days. About being trapped in this fortress, claimed as property, belonging to a king who'd calculated her suffering for legal advantage. About having no power, no choices, no leverage in a world that had already decided her worth. And now he was telling her that her touch was the only thing keeping him from catastrophic destruction. What if I want that? The question came out steadier than she felt. What if I want you dependent on me? Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Why? Because you watched them try to kill me. You let it happen. You claimed me like I was something you found discarded in the mud. She leaned closer, felt the lightning beneath his skin respond to her proximity, settling further. Now you need me. Actually need me, not as property but as necessity. That seems like fair balance. You want revenge. I want power. The admission felt like stripping herself bare. They took everything from me. My pack, my mate, my life. You took my freedom. The least you can give me is this. The knowledge that the ruthless king needs my touch to survive. Darius stared at her for a long moment, and she watched calculations run behind those violet eyes. He was weighing options, consequences, the implications of accepting what she offered. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached up and covered her hand with his own, pressing her palm harder against his chest. You have no idea what you've just agreed to. His voice was barely above a whisper, rough and raw. The curse will demand your touch constantly. I'll need you close, need you accessible. You'll sleep in my chambers, eat at my table, stand at my side during every meeting, every judgment, every moment where the power threatens to overflow. You won't be property anymore, but you won't be free either. I was never going to be free. Marceline felt the lightning pulse beneath her palm, felt the way his body instinctively leaned into her touch. At least this way, I have something you need more than you need your pride. You have no idea what you're trading away. Don't I? She thought about the cursed forest, about dying alone in the mud while the man who'd promised to love her walked away. I know exactly what I'm trading. A comfortable prison where I'm forgotten property, for an uncomfortable one where I'm necessary. I'll take necessary. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face before it hardened back into stone. Then we have an agreement. Your touch for my protection. Your proximity for your survival. But understand this, Marceline. You wanted power, and power always comes with a price. The curse won't just make me dependent on you. It will bind us together in ways neither of us can predict. You'll feel it too eventually. Pull. Need. The way your body responds to mine, because on some fundamental level, we'll be linked. Good. She smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut. Let Raven hear about it. Let Oriana learn that the sacrifice they threw away became the one thing standing between the cursed lands and total destruction. Let my pack understand exactly what they lost. Darius's answering smile was all teeth and danger. You're going to be a problem. You claimed me as found property. You don't get to complain when I start acting like it belongs to me too. Thunder rolled outside, but inside the tower, The air had finally stilled. The lightning beneath Darius's skin flickered gently now, contained and almost peaceful. Marceline could feel her own heartbeat slowing to match his, could feel that hook in her chest settling into something that felt less like compulsion and more like inevitability. She'd survived abandonment, survived betrayal, survived bleeding out in a cursed forest. Now she was going to survive being necessary to a king who'd let her almost die. And maybe, just maybe, she'd figure out how to make him regret ever thinking she was salvage worth claiming. "Remove your hand," Darius said quietly. "Let's see how long we have before the next episode." Marceline pulled away slowly, watching as the lightning immediately began to build again beneath his skin. Not the violent overflow from before, but a steady accumulation that made his eyes glow brighter. He closed them, took a measured breath, and when he opened them again, the light had dimmed slightly. "4 hours," he said. "Maybe less. You should sleep while you can. Tomorrow we start negotiating the terms of your new position." "I'm not going anywhere." She stood, her legs unsteady, and gestured to the destroyed room. "Someone needs to make sure you don't tear your own fortress apart." "Stubborn." "Necessary." She threw his own word back at him. "You said it yourself, I'll need to be close. Might as well start now." Darius looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted. Not softer exactly, but less guarded. As if he was seeing her properly for the first time, not as property or leverage or even as a problem to solve, but as someone who just willingly chained herself to his curse for the sake of having power over him. "You're either very brave or very stupid," he said finally. "Both, probably." Marceline pulled her cloak tighter against the rain still pouring through the broken windows. "But I'm alive and I'm necessary, and that's more than I was 3 days ago. Welcome to Thornhaven, Marceline." His smile was sharp and dangerous and somehow genuine. "Try not to get yourself killed before I figure out what to do with you." "Right back at you, Your Majesty." The lightning beneath his skin pulsed in what might have been amusement. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside the tower, something had shifted. A balance had been struck. A bargain had been made. And the ruthless king who'd claimed a dying Omega as legal salvage was learning that sometimes, the things you find discarded in the mud have teeth of their own. The gardens of Thornhaven were nothing like the carefully cultivated plots Marceline remembered from her Pax territory. Here, everything grew wild and dangerous. Thorned vines that could pierce leather, flowers that bloomed only under moonlight and smelled of graveyards, trees whose bark wept a black sap that Vera had warned her never to touch. It was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, elegant, deadly, and completely unforgiving. Marceline had taken to walking here in the afternoons, during the brief windows when Darius didn't need her immediate presence. The curse's demands had become predictable over the past week. 4 hours of building tension, then her touch to ground the lightning, then another 4-hour cycle. She'd moved into his chambers as promised, slept in a bed positioned close enough to his that she could reach him in the night when the power spiked. It was intimate without being intimate, necessary without being comfortable, and every day she felt the hook in her chest pull tighter. She was examining a cluster of silver flowers that seemed to track her movement when the air changed. Not the electric charge that announced Darius's presence, but something older. Something that smelled of incense and ritual smoke and lies wrapped in holy language. "You look well." Marceline spun, her hand instinctively going to the knife Vera had given her. The priestess stood at the garden's edge, white robes somehow pristine despite the thorned paths. Oriana looked exactly as she had that night in the forest, serene, untouchable, her eyes holding the kind of conviction that made people do terrible things while believing them righteous. "How did you get in here?" Marceline's voice came out steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "The same way I got you out there." Oriana stepped forward, her bare feet somehow finding purchase on ground that should have torn them to shreds. "Through devotion and necessity. Though I must say, finding you took considerable effort. The cursed king keeps his acquisitions well hidden." "Get out." The words tasted like ash. "Before I call the guards." And tell them what? That the priestess who tried to save your pack from starvation has come to save you again. Oriana's smile was gentle, pitying, the same expression she'd worn while binding Marceline's wrists for the ritual. Look at yourself, child. Living in his chambers. Sleeping at his side. Touching him at his command. Do you truly believe this is freedom? I believe it's survival. Marceline forced herself not to retreat as Oriana moved closer. Which is more than you wanted for me. We wanted salvation for hundreds. You were one life against an entire pack's starvation. The priestess spoke as if explaining simple mathematics to a child. The old gods demand sacrifice. We chose the one who had the least to offer, the least to lose. An orphaned omega with no mate, no family, no purpose beyond existing. It was mercy, truly. We gave your death meaning. The casual cruelty of it stole Marceline's breath. You carved me open and left me to bleed out in the rain. That was mercy. Compared to what he's doing to you. Oriana gestured toward the fortress, toward the tower where Marceline spent her nights grounding lightning that wasn't meant to be grounded. Raven may have been weak, but at least he never drained you like a resource. At least your pack saw you as a person, however expendable. They saw me as a problem to eliminate. And he sees you as a battery. Oriana's voice dropped to something softer, more dangerous. Don't you understand what's happening? The curse he claims to suffer from, the power that supposedly needs your touch. It's not salvation, Marceline. It's consumption. Every time you ground that lightning, he's taking from you. Your energy, your life force, your very essence. He's feeding on you the way the forest was supposed to, only slower. Only with your willing participation. The words hit like physical blows because they landed on fears Marceline had been trying not to examine too closely. She did feel exhausted after grounding sessions, did wake sometimes with a hollowness in her chest that hadn't been there before. And Darius had been honest about the dependency, about the binding, but he'd never explained the mechanism. Never told her what, exactly, she was giving up when she placed her palm against his chest and drew the lightning in. I see doubt. Oriana stepped closer, close enough that Marceline could smell the ritual herbs clinging to her robes. Good. Doubt is wisdom trying to break through manipulation. Come with me now. Leave this place before he drains you completely. The pack will take you back, I'll make certain of it. We were wrong about the sacrifice, but we can be right about your rescue. The pack. Marceline's laugh was bitter. You mean Raven? The man who tied my wrists himself. Who couldn't even look at me while you carved prayers into my skin. He's sick with guilt. Oriana's expression softened into something that might have been genuine concern if Marceline didn't know better. He speaks of nothing but you. How he should have fought harder, should have found another way. He wants you back, Marceline. Wants to make amends. Isn't that worth more than being a tool for a monster's power? For a moment, just a moment, Marceline let herself imagine it. Going back. Raven on his knees. Begging forgiveness. The pack that had discarded her suddenly recognizing her value. It would be vindication of a sort, proof that they'd been wrong about her worth. Then she remembered the rain. The cold. The absolute certainty that she was going to die alone because the people who should have loved her had decided she was expendable. No. The word came out firm, final. I'm not going anywhere. Oriana's expression hardened, the false gentleness evaporating like morning mist. Then you're a fool. You think because he needs your touch that you have power. You're wrong. You're a resource he's exploiting, and when he's drained you dry, when there's nothing left of you but an empty shell, he'll find another source. Another omega to consume. That's what monsters do, child. They take and take until there's nothing left to take. Maybe. Marceline felt the knife's weight against her thigh, felt the way her body had instinctively positioned itself between Oriana and the path back to the fortress. But at least he's honest about being a monster. At least he didn't dress up murder in prayers and call it mercy. You're defending him. Oriana's voice rose with something that sounded like genuine shock. After everything he's done, after claiming you like property, after binding you to his curse, you're actually defending him. I'm defending myself. Marceline drew the knife, held it steady despite the way her hand wanted to shake. You want to save me. You're weak too late and several lies too far. Now get out of this garden before I find out if Vera's lessons on throat-cutting were as thorough as she claimed. For the first time, something like uncertainty flickered across Oriana's face. The curse will kill you. Maybe not today, maybe not this month, but it will consume you eventually. And when it does, when you're dying for real this time, you'll remember that I tried to warn you. That I came here to offer salvation. You came here to complete what you started in the forest. Marceline moved forward, forcing the priestess back step by step. You needed me dead then for your ritual. You need me dead now because I'm proof that your gods don't answer prayers, that your prophecies were lies, and that the sacrifice you demanded was nothing but murder dressed in ceremony. Out. Oriana stared at her for a long moment, and something ancient and cold moved behind her eyes. The king has already marked you. I can see it in your aura, in the way the lightning has started to recognize you as its own. You're being transformed into something neither human nor wolf, and you're welcoming it. You're not a victim, Marceline. You're willing prey. Maybe that's exactly what I want to be. The priestess's expression twisted into something ugly, all pretense of concern finally dropping away. Then you deserve what's coming. The curse will hollow you out from the inside. You'll become nothing but a conduit for his power, a living battery with no thoughts of your own, no will, no identity beyond grounding the lightning that should have killed him centuries ago. And when you're finally used up, when there's nothing left but ash, he'll stand over your corpse and feel nothing at all. Are you finished? Marceline kept the knife steady, kept her voice cold. Because if you're not off this property in the next 60 seconds, I'm going to find out if holy blood bleeds the same color as everyone else's. Oriana's mouth opened, closed, then curved into a smile that was all teeth and promise. The offer stands. When you realize what you've become, when you feel yourself disappearing into his curse, come find me. I'll be waiting to pick up the pieces. If there are any pieces left. She turned and walked back toward the garden's edge, her white robes billowing in wind that shouldn't exist. At the boundary she paused. One more thing. The famine hasn't ended. Our crops still fail. Our children still starve. Your sacrifice was supposed to save us, but the forest rejected it. Rejected you. Because you were never pure enough, never worthy enough to be consumed by something greater than yourself. Remember that, when you're lying in his bed and pretending it's power instead of imprisonment. Then she was gone, vanished into shadows that seemed to swallow her whole. Marceline stood alone in the garden for a long moment, knife still drawn, her breathing ragged. The priestess's words circled in her mind like carrion birds, picking at doubts she'd tried to bury. Was she being consumed? Was the exhaustion after grounding sessions her life being drained away? Was she really any freer here than she'd been dying in the mud? She's persuasive, I'll give her that. Marceline spun to find Darius leaning against one of the twisted trees, his silver hair catching the fading light. His eyes weren't glowing, but she could see the lightning flickering beneath his skin. How long had he been there? How much had he heard? How long have you been watching? She asked, echoing her first accusation in the forest. Long enough. He pushed off from the tree, moved toward her with that predatory grace she'd become accustomed to. Long enough to hear her try to convince you I'm draining your life force. Long enough to see you choose to stay anyway. She's right though, isn't she? Marceline didn't lower the knife, didn't step back. Every time I ground your lightning, I feel emptier afterward. Hollowed out. That's not just exhaustion. That's something being taken. Yes. No hesitation, no attempt to soften the truth. The curse feeds on life energy. Normally, it takes from me, consuming my own vitality until there's nothing left but power and rage. When you ground it, it takes from you instead. Channels through you. Uses you as a conduit to dissipate what I can't contain. The confirmation should have been devastating. Instead, Marceline felt something settle in her chest. At least he was honest. At least he didn't dress up consumption in pretty lies. Will it kill me? Eventually. Darius stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the violet light pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. If we do nothing else, if we never find another solution, then yes. The curse will drain you the same way it would have drained me. Slower because I can control how much I release, but inevitable. And you let me agree to this anyway. You demanded it. His eyes met hers without flinching. You wanted power over me. You got it. But power always has a price, and this is yours. The question is whether you still think it's worth it. Marceline thought about Oriana's offer. Going back to the pack, to Raven's guilt and the priestess's false concern. Going back to being expendable, to being the one they'd willingly carved apart and abandoned. Then she thought about the last week. About Darius's grudging respect when she'd refused to flinch from his curse. About Vera's approval when Marceline had asked to learn proper knife work. About having a role, a purpose, a place where she was necessary instead of tolerated. The priestess said I'm being consumed. Marceline finally lowered the knife. That I'm becoming a battery with no will of my own. And what do you think? I think she's terrified. The realization came as she spoke it aloud. Terrified that I survived. Terrified that their ritual failed. Terrified that the sacrifice they threw away is now the only thing standing between the cursed lands and total destruction. She doesn't want to save me. She wants to eliminate evidence of her failure. Something that might have been approval flickered across Darius's face. The curse is consuming you. She's not wrong about that. But you're not a mindless battery. You're the only person in 3 centuries who's been able to touch the lightning and survive. That makes you either the solution or the symptom, and I haven't decided which yet. Comforting. Truth rarely is. He moved closer, and she could feel the lightning beneath his skin reaching for her, recognizing her proximity. The priestess will come back. She can't afford to let you live, can't afford to let her prophecy be proven false. Next time, she won't try to convince you to leave. She'll try to finish what she started in the forest. Then I'll be ready. Marceline sheathed the knife. I didn't survive one attempted murder just to let her complete it. No. Darius reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and placed his hand over hers. The lightning immediately calmed, sinking deeper, and she felt that familiar hollowing sensation as it channeled through her. You survived because you're stubborn and vicious and too angry to die. Don't lose that. Don't let her words hollow you out faster than the curse can. The exhaustion hit like always, but beneath it, Marceline felt something else. A strange warmth where the lightning passed through her, as if some part of it was staying behind, changing her, marking her as Oriana had said, making her into something neither fully human nor fully wolf, but something else entirely. Am I a prisoner or a partner? She asked quietly. Darius considered the question seriously, his violet eyes searching her face. I don't know yet. Ask me again when we're not both trapped by necessity. When the curse is solved or you've decided to leave or one of us is dead. Ask me when the answer isn't complicated by the fact that I need you to survive and you need me to be more powerful than the people who tried to kill you. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was honest. Marceline nodded, felt the last of the lightning dissipate, and pulled her hand away. The hollowness remained, but so did that strange warmth. So did the certainty that she'd made the right choice, even if it was slowly killing her. The priestess said their famine hasn't ended. She started walking back toward the fortress, and Darius fell into step beside her. That the forest rejected me because I wasn't pure enough. The forest doesn't give a damn about purity. His voice held dark amusement. And their famine won't end because it was never about divine judgment. It was about poor crop rotation, depleted soil, and a council too superstitious to consult with actual agricultural experts. So they tried to kill me for nothing. They tried to kill you because it was easier than admitting they'd failed their pack through incompetence. Much simpler to blame the gods and sacrifice an omega than to acknowledge their own stupidity. Marceline felt something fierce and vindictive bloom in her chest. Good. Let them starve. Let them pray to gods who don't answer. Let them understand that the sacrifice they threw away is eating better than they ever will. Darius's laugh was sharp and genuine. There she is. The woman who demanded to be necessary instead of property. Don't lose her to the priestess's poison. They walked in silence for a moment, the twisted garden giving way to the fortress's courtyard. Vera was waiting by the entrance, her expression dark. The wards detected an intrusion, she said without preamble. Female. White robes. She vanished before we could intercept. She won't be back tonight. Marceline kept walking, exhaustion pulling at her bones but determination keeping her upright. But she will be back. And next time, she won't waste breath on trying to convince me of anything. Then next time we'll be ready. Darius's hand settled on the small of her back, possessive and protective and complicated in ways she didn't have the energy to examine. Vera, double the wards on the garden. And send word to our contacts in the outer territories. I want to know everything about this priestess, where she goes, who she speaks to, what other rituals she's planning. You think she'll try again? Vera asked. I think she can't afford not to. Darius guided Marceline through the entrance, and the warmth of the fortress wrapped around her like a blanket. She built her authority on that ritual succeeding, on Marceline dying and the famine ending. Neither happened. Every day Marceline survives is another day of proof that Oriana's prophecies are lies. Then she'll try to make me not survive. Marceline stopped at the base of the stairs leading to their chambers. Good. Let her come. I want her to understand exactly what she created when she left me to die in that forest. Vera's smile was sharp enough to cut. The king's influence is already showing. Or maybe this is who I always was. Marceline started up the stairs, feeling the weight of Darius's gaze on her back. They just never gave me a reason to show my teeth. Behind her, she heard Vera and Darius exchange words she was too tired to parse. The hollowness from grounding the lightning had spread through her limbs, making each step an effort. But she made it to their chambers, collapsed onto her bed, and let herself finally process what had happened. Oriana had infiltrated Thornhaven, had tried to poison her against Darius, had offered rescue that was really just another attempt at murder. And Marceline had chosen to stay, had chosen consumption over salvation, had chosen power over comfort. She didn't know if that made her brave or stupid or something else entirely. But as she felt sleep pulling her under, as she heard Darius enter the room and settle into his own bed close enough to reach, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She'd rather be consumed here, necessary and important and slowly transforming into something more than human, than be saved by the people who decided she was expendable. Let the curse hollow her out. Let the lightning change her. Let Oriana come with whatever poison or blade or ritual she'd planned. Marceline had survived too much to die convenient. They came at dawn, when the mist still clung to the valley and the fortress's defenders were changing shifts. Raven led them, 24 wolves from her former pack, all bearing the ceremonial weapons that meant this was official business. A rescue party sanctioned by the Council of Ravens. Legal, proper, and utterly unwelcome. Marceline watched them approach from the tower window, Darius's warmth at her back as he studied the formation with the detached interest of a predator watching prey stumble into his territory. The lightning beneath his skin had been building for hours, violet light flickering more insistently with each passing minute. She should ground it soon. Would need to if he planned to unleash the kind of power that display of force demanded. He looks different than I imagined, Darius said quietly, his breath stirring her hair. Smaller. He was everything once. Marceline's voice was flat, emotionless. Now he's just the man who tied my wrists and walked away. Do you want me to kill him? The question was asked with such casual sincerity that Marceline almost laughed. Would you? If you asked. His hand settled on her waist, possessive and grounding. But I think you'd rather do it yourself. You would. The realization settled in her chest like certainty. If Raven died today, she wanted it to be by her hand, her choice, her justice. Not divine intervention or kingly protection, but her own rage given form. The delegation stopped at the fortress gates. Raven stepped forward, his shoulders squared with false confidence, and called out in a voice that carried across the courtyard. I come under the protection of the Council of Ravens to retrieve Marceline of the Blackroot Pack. She was taken unlawfully and is held against her will. By ancient law, I demand her immediate release. Vera appeared in the courtyard, arms crossed, expression carved from ice. She wasn't taken. She was claimed as abandoned property. The laws are very clear about what happens to wolves left to die in cursed territory. She wasn't abandoned. Raven's voice cracked slightly. She was offered as ritual sacrifice. Holy exchange. The king had no right to interfere. The king had every right. Darius's voice rang out from the tower, amplified by power that made the very stones vibrate. You completed no ritual. You carved her open, tied her wrists, and fled like cowards when the forest showed its teeth. That's not sacrifice. That's attempted murder. And attempted murder in my territory makes her mine by law. The wolves behind Raven shifted nervously, recognizing the threat in that voice. But Raven himself stood firm, and Marceline saw the desperation in his posture. He actually believed he was here to save her. Actually thought she'd welcome rescue from the monster she'd supposedly been enslaved by. Marceline, Raven called out, searching the fortress with wild eyes. I know you can hear me. Came back for you. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. But you don't have to stay here. The council has granted full pardon. You can come home. We can fix this. We can be what we were supposed to be. Something painful twisted in Marceline's chest, but it wasn't longing. It was rage. White-hot, purifying rage at the audacity of his words. He thinks I want to go back. Men often mistake their desires for reality. Darius's lightning pulsed stronger, responding to her anger. Shall we correct his delusion? Marceline turned from the window and walked toward the door, feeling the power that had been building between them coil tighter. Together, they descended the stairs side by side, and Marceline felt the weight of what was about to happen settle over her like a cloak. This wasn't just about rejecting Raven. It was about claiming her place, her power, her right to choose her own fate. About showing her former pack exactly what they'd thrown away. The courtyard fell silent as they emerged. Raven's eyes found her immediately, and she watched his expression cycle through relief, confusion, and finally horror as he took in the changes. She looked different now, stronger despite the hollowness the curse left behind. Her eyes held the faint violet glow of someone who'd been marked by lightning. Her posture carried the confidence of someone who'd stopped apologizing for taking up space. Marceline. Raven took a step forward, and immediately 6 of Darius's guards moved to block him. Thank God. You're alive. We thought, when we heard rumors that the king had claimed you, we feared the worst. The worst already happened. Her voice cut through the morning air like a blade. You let it happen. You made it happen. You tied my wrists, Raven. You couldn't even look at me while she carved prayers into my skin. I had no choice. His face crumpled with what looked like genuine anguish. The pack was starving. The council demanded sacrifice. I tried to find another way, but there wasn't time, and they said it had to be you and I. You were weak. The words were surgical, precise. You stood there and let them decide I was expendable because fighting for me was harder than letting me die. Don't dress it up in necessity. Own what you did. I'm here now. Raven's voice broke. I'm trying to make it right. Come home with me. We'll leave the pack if you want. Go somewhere new. Start over. Just please. Let me fix this. You can't fix being a coward. Marceline moved forward until only the line of guards separated them. You can't fix standing aside while someone you claimed to love was murdered. And you certainly can't fix it by showing up with an armed delegation and demanding I return to the place that tried to kill me. He's using you. Raven's desperation sharpened into accusation. Can't you see that? The curse everyone whispers about. He's feeding on you, draining your life force to sustain his power. You're dying here, and he's letting it happen because you're useful. I know. The admission stopped him cold. I know exactly what the curse does. I feel it every time I ground his lightning. Every time I wake up hollowed out and exhausted. I know I'm being consumed. Then why? Because he needs me. The words rang with conviction. Not because I'm convenient or expendable or easy to discard. Because I'm the only person in 3 centuries who can touch his power and survive. That makes me necessary, irreplaceable. And I will take necessary over loved any day. Because love from you meant nothing when it mattered most. Raven staggered back as if she'd struck him. Behind him, Oriana emerged from the delegation. White robes pristine, expression serene. Course she was here. Of course she'd orchestrated this final attempt. The girl speaks from trauma, Oriana announced, her voice carrying that practiced priestly authority. She's been manipulated, conditioned to accept her own consumption. This is why we must insist on her release. For her own protection. I don't need protection from him. Marceline felt Darius move behind her, felt his power building toward critical mass. I need protection from you. From people who dress up murder in prayers and call it mercy. From a pack that decided I was worth less than a good harvest. Enough. Darius's voice carried the weight of centuries and the promise of violence. You came to my territory under false pretenses. Claimed rescue when you mean reclamation. Speak of laws while ignoring the ones you broke. Marceline stays because she chooses to stay. And if you take one more step toward her, I will show you exactly why they call me ruthless. The lightning that had been building beneath his skin suddenly poured forth, not wildly like during his episodes, but controlled, directed. It arced into the sky in brilliant violet columns, then crashed down around the delegation in a perfect circle, carving glowing lines into the earth. The message was clear. They stood within his power, at his mercy, and the only reason they still breathed was because he allowed it. Raven dropped to his knees, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of power on display. Most of the wolves behind him did the same, their instincts screaming submission in the face of an apex predator. Only Oriana remained standing, her expression finally cracking into something ugly. You've doomed her, the priestess spat. That power you're so proud of, it will consume her completely. She'll be nothing but ash and memory within a year. Then I'll have a year of being necessary. Marceline stepped forward, past the line of guards, until she stood at the edge of the lightning circle. A year of being powerful. A year of mattering. That's more than you ever offered me. She turned to face Darius, felt the lightning recognize her, reach for her. This was the moment. The choice that would define everything that came after. She could walk through that circle, return to Raven's guilt and Oriana's false salvation. Or she could stay, let the curse continue its slow consumption, and claim a crown forged from necessity and lightning. Marceline held out her hand to the king who'd let her almost die so he could legally claim her. Darius took it without hesitation. The lightning flared, then settled, flowing from him into her and through her in patterns that were becoming familiar. But this time, instead of dissipating, some of it remained, coiled around her bones, settled into her marrow, marked her not as conduit but as vessel. When she opened her eyes, she knew they were glowing violet, knew that everyone watching could see the transformation, could see her becoming something more than Omega, more than sacrifice, more than the expendable girl they'd carved apart. I, Marceline of no pack, accept my place at Darius's side. Her voice carried the electric charge of the lightning still coursing through her veins. Not as property, not as prisoner, but as partner in power. as the Alpha Queen of the cursed lands. The words were binding, ancient, carrying weight that predated the Council of Ravens and their pitiful politics. Darius's hand tightened on hers, and she felt his approval, his acceptance, his acknowledgement of her claim. Witnessed and accepted. His voice held dark satisfaction. Let it be known that Marceline, marked by lightning and crowned in violet flame, stands as my equal and my anchor. Any who threaten her threaten me. Any who seek to reclaim her will face the full measure of my power. The lightning circle flared once more, then vanished, leaving scorched earth and stunned silence in its wake. Raven looked up at her with devastated eyes. Marcy. That name died in the forest. She felt no satisfaction in his pain, but no regret either. The woman you knew died when you walked away. This is who I am now. Accept it or leave. He chose to leave, stumbling to his feet and retreating with the remains of his delegation. Only Oriana lingered, her expression promising that this wasn't over, that the war between them had only just begun. But Marceline had already won the battle that mattered. She stood in the courtyard of Thornhaven Fortress, hand clasped with a king who'd claimed her as salvage and kept her as necessity, wearing a crown of violet lightning and her own hard-earned power. Let them whisper about consumption and curses. Let them fear what she was becoming. She'd been thrown away once and had transformed that abandonment into something they could never take from her. She was necessary. She was powerful. She was queen. And the cursed lands would remember her name. Thank you for joining the pack today. If this story pulled you in, make sure to subscribe and tap the moon bell so you never miss the next Alpha Destiny. And tell me in the comments, who should we follow next under the full moon?